Hello, thank you for joining Workshop 3 of The Black Family, united by history, restored by storytelling, brought to you by New York Life. The Association for the Study of African American Life and History, in collaboration with Archival Alchemy, presents this national program that highlights the legacy of Black family reunions while encouraging families of all backgrounds to build and renew their own familial traditions and stories. We encourage you to watch the rest of the videos in this series to learn more about oral storytelling, genealogy, and familial archiving. Once you view all of the videos, you could receive a certificate as a family historian from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And now, let's get to Workshop 3 on preserving Black family recipes, led by Thérèse Nelson. This virtual workshop was originally presented live on June 26, 2021 as part of the project relaunch and is now being made available for those who may not have attended that day. Thérèse is a chef, writer, and the founder of Culinary Curator of Black Culinary History. To learn more about Thérèse's work, please read her full bio in the YouTube description. Now, we will turn it over to Joyce Leanne, the founder of Archival Alchemy, to introduce Thérèse and get the workshop started.
Now that we have a sense of how to plan family reunions, we are now going to get into what I find to be one of the most important parts of family gatherings, which is we came to eat, or go and fix yourself a plate, preserving Black family recipes. Thérèse Nelson from Black Culinary History will be guiding us through a presentation on this topic. We all have a verbal family history that has been passed down through great meals and stories from parents and grandparents. Thérèse Nelson is a chef, a writer, and the founder and culinary curator of Black Culinary History. Black Culinary History was founded in 2008 as a way to connect Black chefs, preserve Black heritage through the African diaspora, promote and share the work of Black food and beverage professionals, and maintain the legacy being constructed by Black chefs for the next generation. I had the pleasure of sharing space with Thérèse last October for a Black Foodways event we had at Weeksville Heritage Center, and I was just so enamored by your love of Black culinary history and your wealth of information. And so I'm really excited that the ASALH audience is going to get a chance to spend time with you today. I will turn it over to you now. Thank you so much for being here.
Thérèse, thank you so much for having me. I want to thank ASALH for having me as well. I have been a huge fan of you all for many, many years. So to get this invitation to come in and chat with you about a topic that is very close to my heart is a great honor. So I think I shared in the chat my presentation. I won't use my slides because I think this is Tracy's presentation was so charming and sort of conversational. But if you want to follow along some of the resources that I share, and for the purposes of note taking, the presentation is available so you can check it out. Food and recipes is central to my primary work as a chef, but also I think over the years, navigating my professional life, the power and saliency of Black culture, especially in American foodways, has been such a powerful battleground for the truth of our stories. I think that there's a way that the human commonality of food allows us to sort of have ourselves reflected back to ourselves in the most simple and powerful ways. And so I want to talk to you about recipes. I'll offer that I actually don't love, I don't love recipes generally, mainly because I think they are misused. And it's such a powerful tool that to misuse them feels like a shame. Recipes in terms of cookbooks, in terms of the ways in which we are used to consuming them, are very Eurocentric. If we look at the sort of lineage of American foodways, Black hands have always been in the kitchens of this country, sort of crafting the taste and the sort of the flavors and making this country, helping this country dine well. And so early American cookbooks are so profoundly deceptive because our hand is nowhere to be seen in these cookbooks. And I think that in that way, the traditional structure of recipes sort of disempowers us. Sometimes the narrative that we sort of get told about our culture and our history is that we didn't write anything down, that we didn't have spaces for archiving. And I think the work that Joyce does is so powerful because it shows us the truth of the fact that we always kept records. We always saw the power and value of our culture, but just might not have looked like, it might not have been in a form that is most typically accepted. And so for me, recipes become this really interesting way, if you really dissect them and really sort of treat them as preciously as they should be treated, become this really interesting way to sort of view history and sort of, they become this really interesting tool to preserve your family's legacy in a very modern and current way, a sort of urgent way that isn't just sort of beholden to the past, but definitely a tactic and tool that's useful in the future. When Joyce reached out to participate, I realized that I had to sort of go through my own family's history. I think about our own family reunions and how they really they are part of my DNA in ways that I hadn't really considered. And I think some of looking back at, especially when I was growing up before I left high school, those summers going and reconnecting back with family. My family is from South Carolina, reconnecting with my family in these places where I wouldn't be able to see. I sort of had a small family, nuclear family, and most of our folks were spread out around the country. And so these summer family reunions in South Carolina in this tiny town called Latta were some of the only times I was really able to connect with this idea of a larger family. And I think I took for granted how much of those experiences were really embedded in my DNA. I think watching my great aunts and bake cakes from scratch with no measurements. Tracy mentioned the fish fry, coming from filthy New York to go to the sweet, clean air of South Carolina, and to be out in the woods and watch the men clean fish and prepare oil and all of the side dishes that were sort of created, and sort of the alchemy of it, that the women were creating all the side dishes. And this fish fry was not just like a sort of cookout, it was the first entry point to everybody sort of level setting the weekend. Those experiences are in your marrow. And I think that had we had more forethought about the value of preserving those experiences through recipe, they'd be ones that were much easier to translate generationally. We lost my grandfather, it'll be 9 years ago at this point. And I really only have ties to my paternal, my grandfather's family line. And I think if I reconsidered all his sisters and brothers through the ways in which they cooked and the recipes that I would correlate to them, I think that it gives me such a much clearer way to sort of describe and translate who my folks were than a lot of other forms. And so I don't know, I would love us to start just through this whole presentation, just consider what we think of as recipes. and their general usefulness. What are recipes really? I want us to sort of disrupt our notion of like a static title, ingredient, method of preparation in terms of what we consider recipes to be. I think, excuse me, one of my favorite cookbook writers, favorite writers is a woman named Verna Mae Grosvenor. And she wrote a book called Vibration Cooking that was really sort of genealogy, it was anthropology, but it was cookbook in a form that really wasn't beholden to structure. It was poetry. It was a communication about who she was in this way that was so profound. And I think that it gives you a really interesting example of, rethinking what the structure, sort of disrupting the notion that we have to be beholden to a particular structure. Recipes in general, to my mind, are a communication. It's me trying to tell you how to recreate something. And I think that language that you sort of create in the form of a recipe is much more important than any kind of specific structure. Although I will share one with you if you, that you have a kind of starting point. But please consider the function and the sort of usefulness of a recipe over form every single time. Something like a cake recipe, surely you would need maybe more specific measurements and specific instruction than, say, a salad recipe. But so much of a recipe is about communication of types of ingredients. It's about so much more than just the static recipe. So just reconsider what you think of when you think of static recipes. And also consider that they really are heirloom. I think one of the most beautiful and powerful things is when you go through papers, old papers, not just your personal family papers, but anyone's archives, and you find handwritten recipe cards, or you find cookbooks that are, don't even have anything to do with your family's heritage, but you find cookbooks and you find your grandma's or your mother's handwriting in books. That tactile, that kind of personal connection to the recipes that we cook are so much more valuable than the food itself. And so really just sort of consider what recipes really are. I think that recipes also are useful beyond the cooking. I think about recipes that may be passed down through multiple generations. Say, take a pound cake recipe. Pound cake recipes used to be aptly named a pound of everything: a pound of eggs, a pound of flour, a pound of butter, a pound of sugar. And that recipe still holds up. It's still delicious, but as time has moved on, technology has moved on, our growing practices have changed, the way the flour has gotten better, the quality of eggs has changed, the types of butter that we use or fat that we use in the recipe may have changed. Health concerns change. And so that pound of everything recipe evolves, right? And so to look at a recipe that moves through time and gets updated, and you sort of have the footprint, the sort of fingerprint of everybody's generational touch, generational hand on a single recipe, is such a beautiful and powerful way to sort of show authorship and agency. That I think is important to sort of consider when we are thinking about these dishes that we love and have such a connection to. I also think that we should consider one of the things that Tracy listed up that I found really interesting was this notion of committee, who we deputize in this process. Lots of times in my family's family reunions, it's sort of a group of elders, a group of women specifically, who do the majority of the cooking. If we don't have sort of a restaurant to go to or something like that. And the keepers of those recipes are typically worried about or concerned with just getting the food done right. You don't sort of have a lot of time to consider getting the whole family involved. You're trying to feed a bunch of people in a way that is maybe not, you're not dealing with a professional cook. So, folks who maybe aren't accustomed to cooking for this many people, the concentration on those, the sort of cooking sessions aren't necessarily preserving recipes in the moment. But to my mind, this is a really excellent way to get young people involved, right? Like, technology is at our fingertips. So what would it look like if at that fish fry you had the 16-year-olds who are on their phones anyway to record clips of cleaning the fish, or watching your great aunt make the peach cobbler, or any cooking that's happening in the moment, to preserve it in this way that gets folks involved intergenerationally, but also sort of makes folks consider that they can be part of a process that, even though it's functional, certainly has cultural and I don't know, has such value beyond the sort of practical experience of feeding folks at the actual reunion. Also think about form. I think sometimes I list this up every time, but we sort of consider that recipes have to be handwritten, have to be sort of static. And I think that, video and audio clips of recipes that sort of, again, are communicating in ways that maybe a handwritten recipe, if someone isn't really a great cook or doesn't have a lot of, a written recipe is only helpful if you know how to cook. Or if the person explaining the recipe has such an expansive way of writing that they're able to sort of parse out every step in a way that makes it universal. And so to sort of pair a static recipe with audio or video is so helpful, and is, again, ways that you can get sort of intergenerational coalition together to start thinking about your family's recipes. I want to talk to you a little bit about basic recipe structure, because, again, while handwritten recipes are not the sort of end all and be all, they are sort of they are useful tools. There are really 4 main sections to recipes that you want to consider. Again, think of, like, just in your mind right now, think of a recipe that you just love. It's one that your family is just, like, one maybe you don't have a recipe for handwritten, but one that you know how to make is just delicious to you, and you can taste it right now. There are 4 sections I think if you really are profoundly intentional about and make the most of, will make that recipe sing for really anybody. Title, right? What we name the recipe, naming the recipe as specific as possible, giving credit to the person who taught you the recipe, so you sort of have the footprint, have the sort of the fingerprint of that family member, that generational family member in the name of the recipe. That is, sort of just giving sort of authorship to folks is important. I think that it also makes the document now a piece of history. It's not just sharing my potato salad recipe. It's putting the sort of giving honor to folks who contribute to that recipe. Head notes are a big deal. In my industry, head notes are very controversial in recipe writing, because I think people are very accustomed to sort of going online and just picking recipes out of the blue to kind of get a general blueprint of a recipe, and then putting their own spin onto things. And so it sort of diminishes the sort of the authorship, maybe is the word, but it sort of, I think it makes recipes less precious. Head notes are really a communication really before you look at ingredients or instructions. They're the things that give the recipe context. They're the story behind it. I personally love super long head notes that give tons of information. the seasonality of the fruit that you're using in a cobbler, who the recipe came from originally. You're giving information so that the person who's consuming, about to use this recipe, has tons of information to get them in right relationship to the process that they're about to go through. It could be a 10-minute recipe, it could be a 4-hour recipe, but you are about to ask somebody to spend time, giving this time and energy over to creating this recipe. Those head notes are really the thing that kind of give honor to and sort of respect to the rest of the recipes to come. Ingredients, I say, is a loaded section. I think between head notes and ingredients, you really are trying to give as much information to folks to set them up right before you get into method of preparation. So ingredient lists, try and be as specific as possible. This is where, watching your grandma make her sweet potato pie and watching the ingredients, like if she just seemingly picking ingredients out of nowhere, that's when you get somebody who can, sort of, if she's roasting 4 sweet potatoes, real quick, get the sweet potatoes and weigh them, right? If she's, sort of eyeballing the amount of heavy cream or condensed milk or something, start with what the original size of the can was, and see how much is displaced to kind of get those specific ingredients listed out. Like there's a alchemy to it and a sort of natural evolution of recipes, and that you can kind of, just by watching and sort of being in community with someone while they're doing these recipes, can easily help to tie down some specific specific amounts to ingredients. But really just think about being as sort of specific about measurements as possible, as specific as you can be. Also, when you list ingredients, really think about provenance, right? Like talk about the kind of butter you use, the sort of like as detailed as possible, because someone looking at this recipe out of context should be able to you communicating tons of things that you don't even realize you're communicating, just in listing ingredients, right? If your family has a supermarket that they love to go to, if they have a specific kind of salt they use, all those things are communicating regionality. They're communicating socioeconomics. They could communicate tons that you don't even realize, but will help people to recreate the recipe as closely to your intentions as possible. And also, I find, to me, going through archival recipes, that you can tell the time frame, the era that the recipe was written in based on ingredient lists. And so it's a really deceptively simple, but really important section of your recipes, because you are communicating so much and not even realize it. Think about a red velvet cake, right? Red velvet cake was sort of a cake that was born out of World War II rationing. Actually, I think World War I, but chocolate wasn't available, right? Like you had these decadent, delicious cakes, and you weren't able to sort of process cocoa and chocolate and sugar in really interesting ways. So you find recipes from that era that are, sort of the traditional red velvet cakes, but they had cocoa powder instead of chocolate, and you would, because the cocoa powder wasn't processed because rationing, its interaction with baking soda and baking powder, again, ingredients that, depending on what era the recipe was written in, wouldn't even, baking powder is an affectation of a really particular point in history, that reaction gave you a reddish kind of cake. And so chocolate cakes turned red during this particular era, but they were so delicious that people sort of kept the recipe. And so when, you had this kind of odd, kind of burgundy kind of colored cake once the cotton was high and wartime was over, and all of a sudden you can add food coloring or add more chocolate or change the color altogether. And so you can watch a recipe like a red velvet cake that it has at this point 100 plus year history, and depending on the ingredient list can tell you when the recipe was written, what part of the country the person who wrote it was lived in, that kind of thing. And then we have method of preparation. I mean, you sort of this is the meat of the recipe. This is how you really explain to someone how to do what you do. Conventional recipe writing will tell you the number, each step, to be as descriptive as possible in each step. But again, you can disrupt form, but you just are trying to get someone to make your movements, to do the recipe in a way that will get them as close to your end product as possible. This is where you talk about the tools you're using. This is where you get as specific as possible as you can with reference to just all those little steps. If you're baking bread, the humidity in the air, time of year, all these factors really do tie into, sort of how you're trying to set someone up to be as successful in the recipe as possible. So the method preparation section is really the one that gives you the most tangible information about how to apply your context, all these ingredients into a usable product. Let's see. So recipes are really only as valuable as the way in which we archive them. And you all are in for some really wonderful presentations over the summer, of the next 7 or 8 presentations to come. That will give you sort of best practices for archiving and oral storytelling. But if you're interested in sort of creating a family cookbook, there are lots of tools. If you sort of, again, the static book form of a family cookbook is super valuable, and there are lots of tools available to you to create your own. There's a company called the Cookbook app that makes it all digital. So you can go into the software, you can create a digital cookbook that you can share among your family. You can get folks to contribute their recipes and upload them all. It makes the app downloadable to your phone. So now you have your family recipes at the, push of a button on your smartphone or on your computer. It's a great platform just because it's definitely it's the most modern of the ones I'll share. And again, it's a cookbookapp.com. It's super dope. It's a really simple site to use. I think they might recently have an option to print the book, but for primarily it's really sort of about having a digital version of your family's app. I think that the digital part is helpful as well because it could be a run-in or kind of, it can kind of be a run-in, or you can kind of add to it periodically, so it doesn't have to be a static form. Like once you print the book, you have to reprint it and all that kind of jazz. But like this app is great because you can kind of continuously add to it. Another site I really love that we used a couple years ago for my family was a site called Blurb. BLURB. It's a dope site because it's basically a print to order site. It definitely has a internal tool to sort of design books. So if you have someone in your family who is good at graphic design, it can kind of help you to sort of structure the book. They have internal tools that sort of make it relatively simple, but it's really sort of for the folks who already kind of have their family recipes all kind of collected, images taken, and you just want to sort of paste it and get it printed as a book. Their books are a little pricey, but they're beautiful quality. And I think it's in terms of, having that one archival book that kind of is maybe the record of that year's family reunion or something. It could be a really interesting tool. It's also, again, print to order, so you can kind of decide, what level, like what quality level you want the book to be. And the final one in terms of traditional cookbooks, I would say, is the site called heritagecookbooks.com or heritagecookbooks.com. It's a good one because it's specifically made for folks who are trying to do family cookbooks. And their print per order is a little less expensive than Blurb. And they also are, again, because they are made for family cookbooks, they have recipe builder software. And so if you aren't really sort of comfortable yet or familiar with writing recipes in traditional forms, then it's a really great resource because they have the tools already, kind of like the cookbook app, to sort of help you build structured recipes. I'll share 5 cookbooks that I love that I think if you are really interested in sort of thinking about the expansive-ness of sort of the structured traditional cookbook are just some of my favorite ones to sort of use and go back to. Cleo Butler wrote Cleo's Kitchen. I believe it was written in the 2000s sometime, but it's 8 decades of her family's history. And I love it because it really does sort of highlight some of the points I made earlier about the usefulness of recipes as not just sort of static recipes, but really sort of family genealogy and archive. It's one of the few books that I think it does the work of sort of honoring the diversity of the Black experience and sort of through the lens of food. And it's one of the ones I think that for its time and era was really outlined in the way that it sort of honored this notion of the pride of place and kind of the expansiveness of our culture and foodways. And I don't know, it's one of the ones I go to all the time. I've referenced it over the years. And it's just really beautifully done book. Another one is Norma Jean Darden and her sister did Spoon Bread and Strawberry Wine, which again looks at the family genealogy and family history through food in a really interesting way. It's been in multiple printings, and Ms. Darden actually she runs a restaurant right here in Harlem, and is in her 80s and still going. And so I think that her book is really powerful because she's someone who has she's been in the restaurant industry for a long time. The ways in which she thinks about Black heritage and the recipes that she shared in that book really to sort of give you a sense of the sort of iconic recipes you kind of look for in your own family to sort of use as valuable. Another book, Tracy, if you go to her website, I don't know what the correlation is, but the National Council of Negro Women in the 90s, I think it is similar to her National Family Reunion event, but they had the Black Family Reunion cookbook. And it is one that I love so much. It has multiple printings as well, but it does, to me, the prime example of a sort of blueprint for the family reunions, a family reunion cookbook. It was sort of a commemorative book in support of the national effort to bring the family reunion national and sort of capture the quintessential nature of the Black family reunion. So it's just a really interesting book. It's sort of multiple families across the country contributed. I think it gives you a really good example of like how to take disparate recipes and make them into something that feels so timely and cohesive and, I don't know, just culturally rich. 2 other books that I'll mention and move on quickly are books that I think do a really interesting job of helping us think about what our foodways really are, what the roots of them are. One is A Taste of Country Cooking by Edna Lewis. Grind Down with Southern Cooking. People laud this book as a sort of, referendum on Southern cuisine, but I actually read it as her very intentional and very specific story around her own family's tradition. She was from Freetown, Virginia. Her people were, the sort of first colony of free people. And this book it takes the idea of celebration, individual celebrations, and creates menus based on each celebration. And so while it's sort of this celebration of the South, it really is a celebration of a very specific South, her family South. And I think that it is an interesting way to structure a book, because maybe you don't, maybe it's not just structured in some of the ways that books are typically by like meal segment. This book is structured by celebration. So maybe consider what some of the most valuable celebrations beyond the family reunion are for your family, right? Like, maybe one family does Christmas really beautifully. So they take, Christmas, and maybe Thanksgiving is the providence of some of the fried, turkey some family does is just amazing. So maybe, you divide up the work of creating a family cookbook by celebrations. And so to have folks think about menus based on those celebrations and that be their contribution. And the final book I'll share with you is my all-time favorite book, which is Vibration Cooking, or The Travel Notes of a Geechee Girl by Freddie Smart Grosvenor. I love the book because she completely broke form. I think I've been sort of talking about disrupting the notion of recipes since the beginning of this presentation. And it really is because Redmayne was so irreverent about European structure. And her book was really this sort of love letter to the Low Country, South Carolina. And it was her sort of using art and poetry and heritage to sort of tell us who she was through food. And she did it in a way that, there are recipes that are literally just, cut the rabbit, saute it up, season it, and serve. If you have a vocabulary for the food that she's talking about, then you can kind of glean what you need from her instructions to make something that is similar to what she intended. But I think the kind of the bombast of the way she sort of broke form in this book was really sort of about moving center to our culture and to making who we are the most important part to add onto the page. And so I just would offer Vibration as a way to sort of think about maybe not being so beholden to traditional recipe forms as much as the usefulness of the form to communicate who you are and who your family is and what you find valuable in these recipes. I guess I'll end with non-traditional options. I think that technology is such a valuable tool when we think about recipes, and I think that as we've seen sort of food television evolve and erupt and become so much more part of the zeitgeist, that we should sort of consider that, again, certainly you want to cook the delicious, peach cobbler, and you want to make the amazing, buttermilk biscuit, but the story behind all these dishes are really, I think, the most valuable heirloom that we have. And so consider, talking to those elders who, are not promised to us. Get them to talk. If they can't, physically make the recipes, get them to talk through the recipes. If they can, if they are able to create recipes or to recreate the recipes, record them. Use forms that are not static, because these forms are going to be the ones that are the most accessible beyond your family, and I think will be profoundly useful in the future. So there are 3 tools that I love so much for thinking outside the box in terms of recipes. The first is StoryCorps. StoryCorps is an app, an audio platform brought to you by NPR. It is a way to archive audio clips that's so dope. You get sort of tagged in searchable clips that are useful internationally. You can be very specific about your family in terms of how you tag your information, but StoryCorps is a really wonderful platform to upload and preserve your audio clips that, especially in ways that could be useful to other folks who are looking for best practices. Tracy also listed a Facebook. I love Facebook groups for family archiving. Your family reunion should certainly have a Facebook group, but your family just in general could have a group that is just keeping everybody connected. And it becomes a really interesting and wonderfully simple, free space to sort of share your recipes, share your videos. It could be your weeknight, your weeknight dinner recipes. All of those recipes are as valuable as the super important heirloom recipes. Your dope pasta salad, your dope, summer salad, to have it be this running archive of the way your family eats and dines is such a valuable tool. And so don't discount the usefulness of being active on social platforms that you're kind of keeping your family across the country, around the world engaged. And then the last one, outside of a personal family website or blog, would be YouTube, in my opinion. You're watching this content here on YouTube, and I think that a family page on YouTube, again, influencers and all kinds of folks use YouTube, but YouTube is a free and accessible platform to anyone. So you can have your family's YouTube channel, as you keep it private if you want, certainly have it public, but your YouTube channel, to be able to archive and upload videos from your reunion, videos of recipes that you think are dope, is a profoundly valuable tool, and it's right at your fingertips. Uploading is super simple. I just think it's a really interesting and valuable way to keep this content preserved. I think we discount the value and power of the practice of preservation. It's a muscle you kind of have to use. And so if we sort of get in the practice of honoring and sort of seeing more value in our family's recipes, we'll be in the practice of using them and kind of preserving them. So it's not such a chore to sort of to get it done. I think that you sort of see all of a sudden, as time passes, you have a whole cookbook if you just sort of keep after it for even a month. Think about if everyone contributed one recipe a week for a month, if your whole family did it. You have a whole cookbook in a month. But yeah, just sort of considering and reframing the power and value of recipes, because they're right here for you, and it's something that we have to cook for ourselves, and we have these traditions that are right here in plain sight. But if we just add a little bit more, add a little bit more reverence to their cultural value, we have a really interesting and powerful tool to pass along. So I think that's all I have. You can reach out to me anytime at my website, blackculinaryhistory.com. You can email me through the site or at Thérèse@blackculinaryhistory.com. And I'm on most social platforms as Black Culinary. So if you ever want any tools or tips or information, on the site, we have lots of reading lists for books that you can use and reference, and videos, etc. So check us out, and I just appreciate your time.
Thank you, Thérèse. Thank you so much. Your love and your passion of Black culinary history and heritage and foodways is so permeable. And I just really, really appreciate being in the space with you and getting the chance for people to see that. And just thank you so much for decolonizing the recipe, for deconstructing what it is, and really making it fit within the construct of what it is inside Black families. Thank you so much for all that you've shared. We now will take some questions. If anyone has any questions, this will be a good time to ask. There's one question from Jennifer in the chat. You may have already answered this because I think you mentioned one of your favorite books up at the top of your presentation, and then I think you gave a fuller list towards the end. But just in case, the question is, what was the title and author of the authentically written cookbook that you described as poetry? Is it available for purchase?
100% is ready-made smart grossness, vibration cooking, or the travel notes of a Geechee girl. It's beautiful book. It's been reprinted several times. She's having a sort of resurgence now. Just because I think people are paying more attention to our food culture. She was somebody who did it beautifully. She was telling us the truth about who we were in the 70s. Actually, my favorite of her books is a book called Thursdays and Every Other Sunday Off. She wrote Vibration in 72, and I think she wrote, no, it's in 1970, and she wrote Thursdays in 72. And that book is really sort of about the domestic worker and how powerful and how much respect you need to put on the work of domestic service, because she was sort of saying that like these women held, these not just women, but these women and men held our culinary traditions in their marrow, that these women and men who sort of responsible for the taste of this country, who did it professionally, of course, transferred those skill sets to their family dining net. The skills that you brought to creating these, gorgeous, technically excellent dishes, of course, would translate into how you fed your family. And so sort of restoring sort of honor and sort of authorship agency to folks who you would label as domestic, was like her, that's the whole point of the book. It's so dope. But Vibration is really my favorite. It's really dope. And she sort of asks you to sort of dismantle what you think about recipes in that book.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for uplifting authors who are, practicing these different ways of embodying and presenting and preserving the recipes of our people. So appreciate you sharing so many resources. Is there any other questions that we have from our viewers on ASALH TV or any other folk who are on Zoom with us? That was thorough then. So you were thorough then. Going once, going to, again, I think I said I just really wanted you to be the person to present this, because I really appreciate the way that you think about the recipe. And I know for myself, we had a beautiful conversation last, we were sharing a Zoom space about having to, just think about like not the westernized way of recipe keeping. An experience I'll share since we have a few minutes here, and just may provide some more context to what you were offering. So we had at our Sensing History program for Weeksville Heritage Center, the Black Foodways component, we had Chef Omar Tate prepare a beautiful menu for us, and also to prepare a cooking demo video. And myself, who does not cook that much, I am Blue Apron, culinary, like whoever, if there's anybody out there who wants to cook for me, please contact me, because I'm just not cooking for myself these days. And I do like follow recipes. I realized through my interaction with you and Omar that is a part of myself that still needs to be decolonized, because there was the way in which I'm so used to looking, if I do cook, that I'm so used to following the recipe like word for word. And that when I was engaging Omar Tate's recipe, I remember looking at the recipe he shared and looking at the video, and they were not syncing up. And I understood it in hindsight. Why that happened was that he got in the kitchen, he got inspired, and it was like, oh, let's add a little bit of this, or based on the ingredients he may have had the day that the recipe was created versus where he was in the present time of cooking. Those are different constructs. Black time is real. And we like, oh, we didn't forgot about this whole other thing that we done did. And now we're here. And so I'm trying to follow his instructions from a past time and not really engaging him in, like a more present time, and not even engaging myself as a person in the kitchen cooking. And that was something you really helped me to, you really empowered me when we shared space last time to really to think through, because I knew intuitively for myself that I shouldn't do what I was about to do, but I did it anyways because the recipe said so. And so I just really, again, just wanted to share that to provide more context to just even like how this came about, and just really wanting to continue. I think there's so much that we can explore in this topic around really decolonizing the recipe, deconstructing what it is that we hold those and we preserve it in so many different ways. And I really appreciate you giving so many different examples to the people about how that can happen. So thank you. And thank you again for empowering me. I still ain't been cooking, but at least I know the recipe ain't the way. So
just say this though, I will say, I don't want to put too fine a point in the fact that, on the idea that we don't need recipes. I'll say that the thing I sort of was trying to impart to you, and just this thing about trust in ourselves. I think the valuable thing about recipes is that they are communication. They sort of teaching someone how to do something, and really just teaching you how to trust your instincts, right? Like the part of what I was saying about sort of method of preparation, like I'm giving you as many markers, as many tools about how to sense when something is done or ready as I can, so that you now know, you now are empowered to sort of think through. Also, like Black bread is a prime example. That company is fine. Those companies, but the sort of intention in those recipes to sort of make it as sort of simple and replicatable as possible is all on the back end. Like when you get your recipe card and your ingredients, that all the work is done for you. But even in that, you should, what do you love? If you want more sesame oil, if you feel like it's a little more salt, that's you adding your fingerprint onto a recipe that has so much intention, so much work has gone into. But you are now deputized at that kitchen, at the stove, to sort of add your fingerprint into the experience. And so I just want folks to sort of not be as sort of beholden to recipes, but sort of trust yourself to be part of the process.
Oh, don't be so, what is it saying? Don't be so precious with it, you know? And I love this language of adding your fingerprint to it. And I think that then is, if we think about just the space we're in with this project, the genealogy of that fingerprint, the trusting of the family, all of those different things. So we have a question now that came in from our ASALH TV viewers. How do we change the narrative that African-American culinary culture is just slave food, or is just European foods that have nothing to do with our own African-American creativity?
Well, I think reframing language is critical as well. Sort of, our foodways get sort of put into this box that centers the enslaved experience as the primary space that our heritage showed up in this country. Our foodways are diasporic. They come from, they touch so many parts around the globe. You don't really have global cuisine without the sort of African diaspora, right? And so really, I think the way in which we dismantle that misguided idea that our food is simplistic, that has no depth of roots, is really to sort of think about and understand the truth, right? That when you look at a recipe and really kind of look at it, really kind of go back to its actual origins, you find us everywhere. You find our DNA in so much of what we think of as global cuisine. And so it really, I think, comes from starting from, I'm always a person who is empowered by individual responsibility to know the truth. And once you know better, you got to do better. You can't, you reframe how so often in our own culture, we talk about our food as though it is unhealthy, it is, sort of destructive in this way that is so profoundly ahistoric. That if you look at even if you just took the life of the enslaved diet was primarily plant-based. Certainly the enslaved experience had spectrums depending upon where you were in the country. Surely that's part of the story. But in every instance that we find in archive and it's the truth of the life of the enslaved cook, there was profound honor and dignity and placemaking and the ways in which they engage their practice. And so even just in that notion of like, even the idea of like making a way out of no way, taking the scraps and making something dope, even that narrative, I think disempowers the notion that you weren't just taking this, you understood the alchemy of cooking and were able to make something delicious regardless of what ingredients you had. And so I think that there's this way in which we should just reconsider who we give authorship to in this experience. So much of the conventional wisdom of those times, via cookbooks, via the way in which history is relayed to us, leaves out our voice. And so using conventional wisdom, using what we know to be true about the diaspora, using what we know to be true about who is doing work, how, through the voices of folks like Michael Twitty, the voices of so many historians who are doing this archival work, they're telling us the truth. Right now on Netflix, we have High on the Hog. Dr. Harris wrote that book 10 years ago, giving us a really clear and very simple linear idea around how our culture shows up in the building of American cuisine. Now we have a documentary that shows us ourselves to ourselves, or takes us back to ourselves, from the birth of the nation to emancipation. Watch that series, but also read the book, right? You read that book, now you have 50 other books you should go to. There's content that is right here for us that dismantles that nonsense. One read. The first paragraph on the Hog will get you right.
Yes, get you right. Dismantling nonsense. Yes, yes. I love our people. Yes, thank you again. Your passion and just I love, I think I might have told you this the last time, just the way in which you, as a vessel, are one of our gifts of preservations in Black culinary. Like the way you just devour and this information, and it comes out of your pores. I'm just like, and this and this and this. And this is just, again, my second time sharing space with you. And it's just the same type of energy. And just even now you have new reference points because it's been 6-7 months. So you didn't saw some more things. So I just really, really appreciate what you do in preserving our culinary history and also in disrupting narratives, So yes, let's see. I think we may have another question that has come in. Thank you for saying that. There is a movement that doesn't give value to our ancestors' way of cooking and or does not accurately represent it. Yeah, so more gratitude for your perspective is definitely very much appreciated. Do we have any more questions, comments in regards to this wonderful presentation? Okay, well, I thank you again. You could feel free to, yes, go, yes, thank you. So I'm gonna end us out with just a few little housekeeping notes, and then we will go on about our day. Hey, we got out of here a little early. That means you got some time to go make you some lunch, because I don't know about you, but I'm a little hungry right now. So now I'm gonna go whoop me up some leftovers. First, before we go any further, I would like to take a moment to give a special shout out to our sponsors for this project. New York Life, we really appreciate the grant that has provided this opportunity for us to really be able to bring this type of dynamic and multifaceted program to a national audience, and even beyond the people who are tuning in today, who may tune in the next few months. This information will be there in perpetuity. And so just really appreciate you seeing the value in this type of project and giving us all of the funding for us to be able to bring it all together. So shout outs to New York Life.
Thank you for joining us for Workshop 3